Hi, I'm Mike Beliveau, and today we're at the West Shore Sportsmen's Association. And the reason we're here, instead of at Duelist Den, is because there is a group of crony politicians, corrupt crony politicians, in North Hopewell Township who are trying to run me off my property. And we're giving them the fight, and we'll have our day in court. But until we settle this in court, I can't shoot on Duelist Den anymore. So we're here at the West Shore Sportsmen's Association, and today I want to tell you the story of Ben McCulloch and the Texas Colts. And standing in for the actual 19th century Texas Colts will be my third generation Colt Signature Series 1860 Army. So let's talk about Ben McCulloch. Well, look, before we get into Ben McCulloch's tale, why don't we load up the Colt Signature Series with the fully fluted cylinders and just make a little smoke. Alright, let's load up our third generation Colt here. I'm going to be loading it with these Johnson & Dow conical bullets. Now, in the 1860s, these guns would have primarily been loaded with paper cartridges because they were developed that way for the military. Now, unfortunately, the third generation Colts are made with Uberti components. And there's a lot of misconceptions about, second and third generation Colts. So the second generation Colts, like this one, used very rough castings from Uberti for the frame, a couple of other pieces that were machined at Colt or at Ivor Johnson, depending on what series you had. Machined, fitted, finished, the whole bit. So they really were made to Colt specifications. Now, these third generation models, also known as the Signature Series, because as you can see, we've got Sam Colt's signature on the back strap in gold. So the Signature Series, these were made with components from Uberti. So the barrels came in unfinished, but a fully made barrel, the frames, etc. Right, and at Ivor Johnson, what they did, of course, is they assembled them, fitted them, finished them, gave them beautiful finishes. But the dimensions are Uberti dimensions. And unfortunately, this part right here, the loading window, is not big enough to accept paper cartridges. That's the way it is on Italian guns. And typically on my Uberti 1860s or my Pieta 1860s, I open this up. It's not that difficult, but I have to open it up, grind it, polish it, reblue it, and then they'll accept paper cartridges. I don't want to do this to this third generation Colt because it actually has some collector's value, and I don't want to ruin the value of it. So I'm just going to load loose powder and loose conical bullets. So, I feel bad about that because I'd like to show you loading paper cartridges, but we'll do that again in another video pretty soon. So, here's how you load it. I'm loading it with 23 grains of 3F Swiss black powder. I'm going to try not to get in the way over here. Right, so 23 grains. I'm going to dump that in the chamber. Make sure we got it all. Now, getting these bullets on is not that easy either, because not cutting the gun for the paper cartridges barely gives us a room to seat a bullet. But it can be done. So get it started in there. Once I get it in the window, there we go. So you see the way the heel drops into the chamber. Alright, so now all I've got to do is ram it home. Okay, so we ram it home, and there we go. So I got 2 chambers loaded so far. I'm going to load all 6 just to stop you guys from complaining, and then we'll go shoot it. Okay, so I've got 6 chambers loaded. Now I'm going to cover the chamber mouths with grease. Ordinarily, if I was using paper cartridges, the bullets would already be lubed on the cartridges, but I don't do that with these, so I'm just going to put a little bit of lube in here just to keep the fouling soft. Well, the final step in the loading process is to cap it. I'm going to use my Swedish capper for that. Very easy to use. And there we are, good to go. Well, Evil Roy had a vamoose when I got run out of the hollow, so he's in our secret hideout right now. But Hangin' Hank agreed to come down here and help me out. So let's see how a Texas Colt does on old Hangin' Hank. Hank managed to dodge a couple of those bullets. I'm already missing Evil Roy. Today I want to talk to you about Ben McCulloch. And particularly I want to talk about the deal he cut with Sam Colt to provide the Texas Rangers with sidearms right at the dawn of the Civil War. But before we get to the story of the Texas Colts, let's review the purchases of Colt 1860 Army revolvers made by the southern states just before the war broke out. The Colt 1860 Army, which at the time was not called the 1860, Colt did not use years to designate their models. It was called the New Model Army at the time, and that was to differentiate it from the Dragoon models, which had been called the Army models up until then. So being a 44 caliber, Colt wanted to designate it an Army model, and now it was the New Model Army, or the NMA. And the New Model Army, our 1860, had a fairly long prototype period, and it had some kind of interesting prototypes. In fact, it had an unserial numbered prototype run that basically used Navy grips and Dragoon-style barrels. And those were the earliest Colt New Model Armies. A small number of those were made. But in November of 1860, the New Model Army officially entered its production phase. So almost immediately when the New Model Army hit the market, southern states began making purchases, and Georgia was the first. And its initial order was for 100 of the 1860 Army Colts. And Georgia followed up that order for 100, which it placed in November, for a second order of 300 more 1860s that it placed on New Year's Eve. In 1861, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, Georgia again, and finally the Confederate government itself all placed orders with Colt for 1860 Army revolvers. The Confederate States order of 15 April 1861 barely beat out President Lincoln's blockade order that essentially started the war. All told, the southern states bought 2,159 of the 1860 Colt Army revolvers before hostilities officially broke out. And that does not include the guns bought by Ben McCulloch for the Texas Rangers. Colt was heavily criticized in the northern press for his sales to the Confederate States as they were ramping up for war. Now, mind you, he wasn't doing anything different than the other northern arms manufacturers were doing, all of whom were selling guns to the South and doing a land office business at it. But Colt was the big fish in the pond, and he's the one who drew the most attention for it. And as I said, he was excoriated pretty heavily in the press. In fact, on January 16th of 1861, the New York Times, though it never mentioned Colt by name, basically called him a traitor, and it left no doubt who they were talking about. So when President Lincoln's blockade on the 19th of April 1861 went into effect, that was in response to Fort Sumter being attacked, and it basically started the war officially on the northern side. And at that point, Colt stopped doing business with any of the southern states and went about trying to repair its reputation. But he had already dealt with Ben McCulloch. So before I take a look at that sale, let's take a look at Ben McCulloch himself. Because Ben McCulloch is an individual who's worth knowing. And I would guess anybody who's watching this from Texas is probably well aware of Ben McCulloch. But for people who are not, let me tell you a little bit about him. Because long before the Civil War, Ben McCulloch was a Texas legend. In fact, an Austin newspaper wrote about him. I'm going to read this quote because I think it is so great. Ben McCulloch has killed more bear than Davy Crockett, fought more Indians than Daniel Boone, and in Mexico, he was simply incomparable. And that's not the half of it. Ben was born on November 11th, 1811, in Rutherford County, Tennessee. At the age of 24, he followed Davy Crockett to Texas. So we're on a gun club. You got the sounds of freedom going off over there. I've been trying to get through this in between barrages of fire, but sometimes it's just not going to be possible. At any rate, at the age of 24, Ben McCulloch followed Davy Crockett to Texas, he and his brother Henry. But on the way to Texas, Ben came down with a case of measles. And measles are no joke today, but of course we're able to treat them much better. In the 19th century, measles was a disease that could kill you. And it laid Ben low for some time. But in a way, it was a lucky break for Ben. Because if he had not come down with measles, he would have ended up being a martyr at the Alamo, and that would have been the end of Ben McCulloch. But as it was, he missed the Alamo fight. But by the time he was better, he joined the Texas Army, and he served at the Battle of San Jacinto. At San Jacinto, he commanded one of the Two Sisters cannon batteries. There were 2 6-pounder cannon sent to Texas by the citizens of Cincinnati. One of the twin sisters was named Eleanor, and the other one was named Elizabeth. So Ben McCulloch fought that cannon, commanded that battery so well. He fought ferociously. And at the end of the battle, he was actually given a battlefield commission to first lieutenant. After San Jacinto, Ben McCulloch returned to Tennessee. He raised a company of volunteers that he brought to Texas, and he placed them under the command of Robert Crockett, who was a friend of his, Davy Crockett's son. And he served the rest of the war with that company. In 1838, McCulloch joined Jack Hayes' company of Texas Rangers. And he acquired a reputation as being quite an Indian fighter. Ben McCulloch commanded the Texas Ranger contingent that fought in the Battle of Plum Creek. And of course, that is one of the most famous battles in Texas history against the Comanche. McCulloch and his men first served as scouts, and they located Buffalo Hump's Comanche returning after the Great Raid to the Gulf. They were loaded with plunder and captives, and McCulloch located them and brought the rest of the army up to them. At that point, the battle became a long-running fight, and it was actually disastrous to the Comanche. They suffered a terrible defeat. Now, in 1842, the Mexican army actually launched 2 invasions of Texas, 2 major raids, both of which made it all the way to Austin. General Rafael Vasquez invaded Texas in February of 1842. His army penetrated as far as San Antonio. Ben McCulloch was prominent in the fighting that drove Vasquez back over the border into Mexico. The second Mexican raid was led by General Adrian Wall in September of 1842. They again took San Antonio, and McCulloch's forces fought them back across the border again into Mexico. During his service with the Texas Rangers, starting with Jack Hayes, McCulloch became familiar with Colt's revolvers. And he actually became one of the greatest proponents of Colt revolvers at the time and became a good friend of Samuel Colt. And he wrote a number of letters for Colt to the Ordnance Board, urging them to buy Colt's revolvers. Now, with the outbreak of the Civil War, Ben McCulloch and his brother Henry both were instrumental in taking over the federal garrisons on Texas soil, because the federal government, of course, pulled its troops out of Texas, and that left the responsibility of defending the Texas frontier to the Texans themselves. In order to defend that frontier, the Texas government authorized a new regiment of Texas Rangers. And they asked Ben McCulloch to lead it, but Ben wanted to actually fight with the Confederate Army. So his brother Henry McCulloch stepped up and took command of the new regiment of Rangers. But Ben's involvement did not stop there, because the Rangers were chronically short of weapons. So Ben made it his mission to arm them, and he went directly to his old friend Samuel Colt. So on the 24th of March, 1861, Ben McCulloch placed an order for 2,000 1860 Army revolvers with Colt. Now, McCulloch told Colt that the Confederate government would pay the bill. But at that point, Colt knew that he could not invoice that against the Confederate government. He was already in way too much heat with the press. He was losing goodwill fast. But he also knew he couldn't let Ben McCulloch down. Not only was McCulloch a personal friend of his, but Colt deeply appreciated everything the Texas Rangers had done for him, because without the Texas Rangers, he never would have gotten back in the gun business. And he never forgot his debt to them. So he was going to sell Texas these Colts, come hell or high water. But he knew he couldn't invoice them to the Confederate government or to the state of Texas. So he invoiced them to Ben McCulloch as a personal sale. $25,900 worth of Colt New Model Armies were invoiced to Ben McCulloch. A lot of people think Colt only cared about money, but I think this proves that that's not true. He valued his friends, and he honored his commitments. On April 16th, Ben McCulloch took possession of the revolvers in New Orleans. And from there, he was going to ship them overland to Texas. He wrote to Colt on the 16th, letting him know that he had got them. And he said, "I hope I see you in Texas sometime." And off he went. That was the last order that Colt filled for anyone in the southern states until the end of the war. And in fact, just a couple of days later, he got an order from the Confederate States themselves. And it's still in the archives, and on the back is written, "Not shipped." That was it. Ben McCulloch got the last Colt, so we're going to the South. And he got them to the Texas Rangers, where they used them on the frontier throughout the war. Now, Ben himself was commissioned as a brigadier general in the Confederate Army. In March of 1862, McCulloch led a division. In March of 1862, Ben McCulloch commanded a division for the Confederate Army at the Battle of Pea Ridge in Arkansas. On the second day of the battle, a Federal marksman got McCulloch in his sights And that was the end of a true Texas hero. For 10 years, the Colt Company carried in their accounts receivable an account saying they were due $25,900 from Ben McCulloch. After 10 years, they just quietly wrote that off. So that's the history. Now let's take a look at the revolvers themselves that Ben McCulloch secured for Texas. The McCulloch Colts were all what collectors today would call the second model 1860 Army revolvers. About 35,000 second model Armies were produced by Colt between 1860 and 1862. The serial numbers on McCulloch Colts ranged between 200 and 4,700, with 90% of the guns being serial numbered above 2,000. Now the frames on second model Colts are all the 4-screw types, with cuts in the recoil shield for a shoulder stock. And the right side recoil shield had a shallow capping groove cut in it. In later models, that groove was made quite a bit deeper. Now these guns had the classic long 1860 Army grip frame with an iron backstrap and a brass trigger guard. Second model Colt 1860 Armies were available with either a 7.5-inch barrel or an 8-inch barrel. All of the McCulloch Colts had 8-inch barrels. The most noticeable feature on the McCulloch Colts are the fully fluted cylinders. And second model Colts could have either fully fluted cylinders or round cylinders. So they were making both during the second model run, but early in the run, most of them were the fully fluted cylinders, and that's what McCulloch got. Now, because those guns were so early, they have the straight bored chambers, which means that the sides of the chamber are parallel all the way back to the nipple. That had to change because during Army proofing tests, where they would load a 37 grain charge in each chamber and a heavy conical bullet, what they found is that the chambers were blowing out right at the bolt cut, which is the weakest part of the chamber, obviously, because where the bolt engages the cylinder, obviously the metal has been cut away for that slot. And what they were finding is that the first proof shot would bulge them, and a second proof shot was usually blowing that chamber right out. And that was happening to almost every gun. So they sent them all back to Colt and said, hey, you got to fix this before we buy any more of these things. So what Colt did is he developed what's called the cavalry chamber. And that's parallel-sided until you get to the last quarter-inch or so. And then it's kind of conical, really dome-shaped. And by putting that curvature in the chamber, you allow more metal under the bolt slot. In fact, it's twice as thick as the straight-sided chambers. And that seemed to do the trick to keep the guns from blowing up. But a lot of the early guns did blow up. Now, because they weren't all shot with proof charges, they didn't all blow up right away, and some of them didn't blow up at all. But that was a big problem with the early guns. There's only 49 surviving examples of the actual McCulloch Colts, probably because of that chamber issue. So there are a few of them still left, and then there are some in surprisingly good condition, considering the duty they were supposed to be put to. But my likelihood of ever getting one of those is like 0, which is why I was using my Colt Signature Series with the fully fluted cylinder as a stand-in for an actual McCulloch Colt. Signature Series gun here is shooting quite a bit higher than I expected it to. And it really took me longer than it should have to dope that out, but I think I got it figured out now. So let's see if I can ring Hang and Hack a little bit better than I did the first time. And it's also shooting a little bit to the left, which I didn't figure out until just now. And, you know, that worked out okay. I have to say that if you want the most accurate reproduction you can get of a McCulloch Colt, you should look for a second generation Colt Army, 1860 Army. One of the F series guns, or one of the C series guns if you can find them, with the fully fluted cylinders. They made them. And that would be the most accurate you can get. But Uberti also makes a fully fluted cylinder model. And in fact, Cimarron has an antiqued finish version of that they call the McCulloch Colt. So if you're interested in having a Texas Colt, you can definitely pick up a reproduction on today's market that will allow you to shoot a gun that looks the same as the guns that Ben McCulloch would have gotten for the Texas Rangers. And it's kind of a fun piece of history. I hope you enjoyed this video. You know, when I was at the zoning board hearing, which is where the corrupt political gang at North Hopewell Township is trying to boot me off my land. They're trying to stop me from being able to shoot on my land. I've talked about this before. But they were pretty awful to me at that hearing. I mean, they were not nice people at all. And, of course, one of the things that they said is, why can't you just make videos at your gun club? And what I went through today is the reason I don't like making videos here. Because it took me twice as long to make the video as it would have back in the den, because I had to keep stopping for this. A second Mexican army, led by General Adrian Wall, got I know that's the sound of freedom, but it makes it pretty tough to film. So, I'm going to try to, hopefully I will have cut most of that out of the actual video that you guys are seeing, so that you can hear me talking. But, you know, I'll since I'm not on the editing deck yet, it remains to be seen. But I hope you enjoyed this. And if you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Make a comment. Let me know if you liked it. Let me know if you didn't like it. Whatever, that's fine. Not as much shooting in this as I would have liked, because after I finished reading the script, I was almost out of time for the day. It took me like 2.5 hours to get through this script. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and we got more good stuff coming up. So keep your eyes peeled. I'm not able to keep up with my Thursday schedules. Releasing a video every Thursday. Doing the best I can on that, but life is getting in the way, and some of the legal prep work prior to going to court is taking up a good bit of my time, and some other family issues. So it's making it hard for me to get a video out every week. I appreciate people that let me know they miss them, which I've been getting a lot of stuff from, but I just want you guys to know it's not because I died or I'm sick or anything like that. That's not the case. I'm putting them out as often as I can, but the world's getting in the way. In fact, the other thing that got in the way lately is the weather. We just had a full week of rain. And it's just made it impossible to get out and do any filming for a whole week. It's just been crazy. But I've got some stuff that I'm working on, and I'll get it out to you as fast as I can, but I want it to be good. So, I hope you understand if you don't see a video every Thursday. But until the next time, bye.